Good evening, everybody. So you're all very welcome to this week's 120 Dublin Stories with Santa Rita and the Little Museum of Dublin. My guest who's just joined us now this evening. So this evening we're joined by RTE journalist, newsreader and presenter Eileen Dunne. I'm so incredibly thrilled to have you here. So thank you so much.
No problem. I've been a fan since they started, as you know, so I'm delighted to be here.
I was very kind to you, and actually when you say that, so I will mention that I got an email from yourself all of a couple of weeks into the series, and it was the heartening moment pushing us in the right direction and saying that we were doing something right with this series. So thank you for that. But listen, we're here to talk about yourself, not myself this evening. So just to jump into the first question, and now if anyone who's joining us has questions over the course of the evening, do type them in and we will take some time to go through them. But Eileen, take me back to, I guess, back to basics, back to the beginning. In terms of your own parents setting up roots for you and kind of, you know, would you just paint me a bit of a picture of what your Dublin has been throughout your life?
Okay, well, I was born and bred in Clontarf and went to school in Belgrove and then in Manor House in Raheny. And didn't really think about it. I mean, I've always loved Clontarf, but I didn't think about that until I was walking, pounding the seafront for the millionth time, you know, in the last few months. And I thought back to my parents, who were both from the country. My mother's from Westmeath, my father from Laois, and they had lived in Ranelagh, Rathmines before they got married, in digs and in flats and stuff. And I knew they bought the house from a colleague of Dad's. He worked in the Irish press at the time. But I just wondered why Clontarf. Did they decide to come to Clontarf and then look for a house? Or did they hear about the house and so decide to come to Clontarf? So I asked my mother, who's still alive, thankfully. And she said, no, it was the house. And because it was somebody they knew that was selling, they didn't need a deposit. So it was either the house or the wedding. And this way they got both.
That's beautiful. What a fortunate chance that it just happened to be in such a stunning part of the city. And then you mentioned your dad there. And my understanding is your dad was the first Gaelic Games correspondent that RTE ever had. And so, you know, you come from a family where media was very much at the heart. Was that a conscious effort for yourself to go into the industry, or how did that journey happen?
No, not really. Daddy was in the Irish press first, and then in 1970 he moved out to RTE to become the first GA correspondent. Micheál O'Hare was the head of sport at the time. So no, I always wanted to be a teacher. Ask my sisters, they'll tell you when we played school at home, I was always the teacher. And when I qualified, when I got my BA, I went to France for a year before I did my HDip. And when I was over there, I began to have, you know, little qualms about it all. And I thought, well, if it's like this over here, what's it going to be like at home? I was teaching in France. And then the ad went into the paper for radio announcers, for continuity announcers. And my father wrote to me and said, you should apply for this, because I had done a bit of debating and public speaking and performance when I was at school and college. So I did, and it was, you know, Christmas 78 into 79, which was the year of the big postal strike in Dublin. So I filled out a form, which Daddy sent me in France, but he filled one out here. I reckon he got me the interview because he remembered every feis, every medal, everything I was ever in, which I couldn't remember the half of them. So anyway, I always claim it was his application form that got me the interview.
That's beautiful. And so then if you hadn't become a teacher, what would have been your subject?
If I had become a teacher, French and Irish.
That was the love.
Yeah.
Languages. It's a gorgeous thing. It's and I guess, you know, one thing that I kind of got curious about when I guess preparing for this evening was, you know, we've all seen that you did kind of talk publicly about the fact that a number of years ago you'd considered stepping away from, I guess, your role and your work with RTE, and obviously we couldn't have guessed back then what was in store in the years that followed. And I guess kind of looking at the pandemic, looking at where you find yourself working with, or the projects you find yourself working on nowadays, you know, how do you feel when you think back on that decision?
I think I'm glad I stayed. I mean, I'm sure people shouldn't be watching me now. They should be watching the real news. The Taoiseach is probably on his feet. But anyway, I turned 60 a couple of years ago, so I could go. Put it that way. I wouldn't have had the full 40 years done, but I could have taken my pension. And I thought seriously about it because things are changing. They were changing faster than they are now. But certainly, and I wasn't sure I liked the direction it was going in. Then there was going to be this new big studio and we were going to be standing up, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for all of that or if I wanted all of that. And then I really thought about it and I decided, I don't really want to leave. I'm not really ready to go yet. I'm leaving because I'm cross, and I'm leaving because things are happening, but it's not, I don't really want to go. I'm not ready. So I stayed, and I'm glad I did. I'm glad I stayed for the new studio, and I'm glad I stayed to be part of the pandemic, because A, just to be working gives you some sense of normality, but B, it's such a massive story. And while it has been challenging because we've got to work with all these protocols and everything, there's been a fantastic feedback. People have come back to RTE that they trust, the people that they trust, that they're comfortable with over the years. And I suppose I'm just glad I've been part of it, really.
Yeah, because is there a sense that, in a different sense to kind of reporting everyday news stories, you kind of know that you're reporting on a chapter in our history? Like, how does reporting history versus the daily roundup kind of differ as an experience, or does it?
Well, it does a bit. You are conscious of it, yeah, obviously. I would say that, the whole newscasting thing and these rolling bulletins and all that, that's all been developing while I've been working in the newsroom. So the first time that would have struck me really was during the Good Friday Agreement in 1998. I was part of that coverage. And I was very conscious of that as it was unfolding, and in the countdown to Good Friday and all that kind of thing. And I suppose this is the same, and you're seeing, especially in the early days. And everybody will remember where they were when Leo Varadkar stepped out in Washington. I was actually on my way to the dentist up here. And I parked in the Tesco car park in Artane. The dentist is just up the road, listening to him. And by the time I came back an hour later, the car park was jammed. The place was full, because he had just announced that the schools were going to close the next day, and all the mummies were running down trying to get their act together and get stuff in, and people coming out with bags of loo rolls and all that kind of thing. But those moments, yeah, and in those early days, we just didn't know. We didn't know what was ahead of us. People were scared. People weren't going out. So then when you did make your weekly visit to the supermarket, people wanted to talk because they weren't talking to anybody else outside their own houses. So they were full of questions and full of how's it going and what's happening and what do you have to do? And, but you get in now, as I say, the first few months, because every time you went in, the parameters seemed to have changed and protocols were changing and all that kind of thing. But we're all used to it now. People coming back, people came back when we were in level 3, then more people had to go out again in level 5. So we have a lot of people working from home, and we have correspondents who never come into the newsroom. They work out in the field all the time. But some came back and then they had to go again. But the people now will start coming back in again, and they'll find it a very changed newsroom, I think.
Yeah, but I think regardless what industry anyone works in, I think the world and the experience that each of us are having on a day-to-day basis is just quite fundamentally changed in a lot of ways at this stage. But you mentioned the correspondents who are working remotely pretty much permanently, and I kind of stepping away from the pandemic for a minute and just thinking more generally, as someone who has significant experience working 1 o'clock, the 6-1 news, and 9 o'clock, how do they differ as experiences?
Working on the 6-1 or the 9?
Yeah, just in contrast to each other.
Well, they have their independent editors, so and they have designated reporters on some of them. Some correspondents would work only to one, but say somebody like George Lee, science correspondent, or Fergal, the health correspondent, when they're covering a big story like this, they will work across the bulletins and Morning Ireland. In fact, their workload can be quite big. But so yeah, the different editors will have different ideas about commissioning stories and about maybe a backup story to the main story of the day. For the 6-1, which obviously is longer, it's an hour long. The 9 o'clock tends to be more of a summary of the whole day's news. So it's more concentrated. It's only a half an hour compared to it's 25 minutes actually on the air, but compared to the 6-1, which is the hour long. So we don't do as many interviews on the 9. There would be more shorter interviews with the correspondent, which is really just the who, how, why, where, and when. You don't get a chance to tease out stuff really in a 9 o'clock news interview. So that they're the differences, really, I think. Yeah.
Okay. And you mentioned the way that that you've interacted with members of the public. As you said, any of us walk into our Dunne Stores and our weekly shop, and there is that kind of will and want to make eye contact, and you're kind of going, you're a different person. We don't share a house. Please, can we interact for a moment? But like, how are you finding, as someone who is, I would imagine, who people feel a certain level of comfort coming up to and talking about, the circumstances that we find ourselves in, how do you find people's relationship to the news has been in the past 12 months?
Well, I think they're probably, as in the recession, I think in the beginning, people were glued to it because it was all so new and they just didn't know what was happening. I do think a number of people have switched off at this stage because they're just sick of it, can't take any more. I mean, there'll probably be a big audience this evening because the Taoiseach is announcing the news, but in general, I think people are, and I mean, you'd even read the advice, don't consume too much news because it can be depressing and people are under enough pressure at the moment. And even myself, when I come home, if I find the television is on here and people are still watching the news, I'm saying, I can't take any more. I need to turn on a concert now or something. You can only take so much. So I think audiences are holding up, certainly, and a lot of people have come back in a way that they hadn't been tuning in every night. I mean, a friend of mine said to me recently, I would never have said I watched the news every night, but for the last year, I haven't missed it, But I do think people are deciding, okay, I'll watch one news bulletin a day, maybe rather than 2 or 3, and just keep up with the news, and that's it then,
Yeah, and I guess, as you said, though, it is one of those things that we could overload ourselves because these are, heavy realities that we're all dealing with on a daily basis. But how do you kind of, or do you find that there is kind of a sense of, like in the early days when it was, Dr. Leo and Dr. Tony and these voices that yourself and your colleagues are kind of speaking to, kind of seeking information to help kind of inform the public of kind of what's going on. And I'm kind of wondering, how do you take on the responsibility of kind of asking the right questions to make sure that those of us tuning in at home are getting the information or kind of leading the conversations those ways?
Well, as I said to you earlier, in a news interview, it's quite short. So, you're just trying to, the 5 things would be who, how, why, where, and when. And those 5 questions will always establish the facts for you. And I suppose you're kind of putting yourself in the Joe Blogs at home mode, that I hope that I would want to know the same information, or I would want the same answers as the people at home would want. So you hope that you're just putting the right questions. There was one night, I think I was telling you the other day, that Dr. Tony came on, and he doesn't very often come on the 9 o'clock news. So there was some confusion about something, and they said he was available to come on. So he was obviously coming on to clarify something. So I had to ask the question to set him up, and I got into trouble then. I got Twitter and a couple of emails saying, oh, you were too hard on him, but I wasn't, because I knew if he was coming on, no better man to push back. If I was asking him the question, he was coming on to answer it. So I had no qualms about it.
That's interesting, though, because it sort of means that at some point, you kind of, in fulfilling your role in the whole scenario, you're kind of lining yourself up to be the punch bag for the greater good, really.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't see it. I mean, I would always, I think there are some interviewers sometimes who go too hard at people anyway, because maybe it's more about them than the interviewee. I would never, I see myself as a conduit, as you like, or just the messenger, just trying to get the news out there. It's not about me, it's about the news, and it's about the news bulletin. But I just found it interesting, because that would not usually be what would be thrown at me. It would usually be the other, she let him away with murder, or she whatever, So I just found it interesting.
Yeah. And like the, as you mentioned there earlier, a huge number of kind of changes have happened in the experience behind the scenes and kind of what goes into kind of producing the news on a daily basis as a result of the pandemic. But I kind of wonder if you take a step back a little bit and kind of look more generally at the time that you spent on the different slots within RTE, how has the environment of producing news changed over the course of your career?
Oh, it's unrecognizable. I mean, when I went over first, we were still dealing with, I was just looking at something actually today. Tommy Gorman retired recently, and there was a virtual do for him on Monday night. So there was a video compiled, but he was speaking in it himself about his early days. And it was film. And there was a piece of film that had to be got back to the studios from West Cork, and it took 6 hours to get it to Dublin. I mean, now you stick it in the machine and send it. You stick it on your phone and send it, So from that point of view, the technology has just changed so much. When I went in first, a woman used to come in and sit down at the desk, and she would write out on a strip, not unlike a loo roll, except paper, the scripts that I was going to read, which then would be fed through a machine. And if a script was going to change, or if you were moving a story from the first half, maybe to the second half, she'd literally cut and paste. She would cut it out and then bring it down and paste it back in down at the end of the roll that she had. Nowadays, it's all done by computers. So I just get something in my ear saying that script is changing, or that story's moving, or whatever, and it'll just appear in front of me without anybody. It's all automatic now. But that then too has allowed for the cameras the same as this. I can interview someone like this, or we can stick a camera out in there. And that again, around the time of the Good Friday Agreement, around 1998, that was becoming. I remember Albert Reynolds was somewhere. He was Taoiseach at the time, and he just popped up from wherever he was, and that would have been unheard of. That you can suddenly you hear it in your ear, the Taoiseach's going to be there in 2 minutes, at an outside location somewhere, So, the technology has changed incredibly. And now the next phase is the digital phase, and a lot of it is moving digitally. But I think our backbone is still the people who sit down in front of the television at night and watch the bulletin. So I think we just have to be careful not to put the cart before the horse.
And I guess that's the reality, that the kind of, the evening news is the kind of bread and butter. But as you said, kind of digital is, or it's kind of, that's something I wanted to ask you about. Like, what is your thoughts on the kind of the evolving role of kind of digital platforms and kind of how they play a role in telling the news?
Well, they're very important. I mean, I have a son now who's 25. He wouldn't sit down and watch the bulletin at night unless he's forced. But in general, he wouldn't. But he gets it all on the phone, and he's just as informed as I am, or any of us is around here. So people are still consuming news, but just in a different way. But I think to do one at the expense of the other is, you're going to lose somebody if you do that. So I think the two have to. And I might have thought that the digital thing was moving too fast, but I think this last year or so has slowed up that, or has maintained a focus on the traditional form of news telling.
Yeah, I think it is. It's a nice complementary pair in times. Like I took comfort in being able to pick up my phone before we began this evening to get the update on what we were expecting to find out this evening about when museums reopen. But we'll sit down on the player after this conversation and watch back the speech and details. But then I guess kind of going back to the stories, if the bit of research that I did was right, one of the first interviews that you ever did was with Gay Byrne.
Right.
Wonder what that experience was like.
Well, it was grand, except I don't remember very much because I was so terrified, as you can imagine. He brought out a book. Deirdre Purcell helped him to write it. And I was on the 6-1 news at the time. And thankfully we pre-recorded it. It's on a tape. It's on a big old tape somewhere in my locker in the newsroom. About 7.5 minutes of it or something. And I'm sure if there was a minute of anything worth anything in it. But he only did it because he always had a soft spot for me, in fairness. And I'd say that's the only reason he agreed to do it. And I'm sure it's absolutely awful if I were to look back on it. But he did it anyway. So it was great. I was thrilled. I was absolutely thrilled at the time that he agreed to do it. But I was petrified. Just petrified.
You must go back and watch it, I'd say, in hindsight.
I have to get somebody to transfer it onto something that I could watch it on. It's on one of these big old box tapes,
Of course. I would dare say there's someone somewhere that has...
yeah, I'm sure I'd find someone inside, yeah.
But then you also, earlier in the conversation, you mentioned the Good Friday Agreement, and, obviously it's a key event and a key moment in the kind of wider Irish story. But am I right in thinking in your own kind of career development, it was also quite a significant milestone?
It was, because we were coming more into these, what we call rolling bulletins. Ed Mulhall was our director of news at the time. Excuse me. So there would be a breaking story and he would just say, okay, get on the air, and you kind of think, we've nothing to go on the air with. But you suddenly find, so you might go in and you'd have a political correspondent here with you, and you might have one person, Dave Davenport in Belfast, and somebody else somewhere else. And I just remember sitting there in that week doing one of those kind of programs. We're waiting for progress. Is there going to be a breakthrough? All that kind of thing. And I think I had Garrett Fitzgerald in the studio for some reason, and he said something. And I remember picking it up and throwing it to David. And as I'm doing that, I'm actually thinking and speaking at the same time, instead of going in with the 3 questions and you're going to ask the same 3 questions because you're not actually hearing what somebody is saying back to you. You're so nervous. So that was a breakthrough for me in my head, that I think, okay, I have this mastered now. I can do it.
That's kind of a confidence moment. No, it's gorgeous. It's kind of what that made me think of, though, is I don't know how to ask this. In moments like that, is it kind of, is the role of the interviewer, the kind of the presenter, is there an acting element to it? Like, it's a performative experience by its nature. I just wonder, I'm not sure if my question's clear, but how do you perceive the performance element of your work in that way?
I suppose the public speaking and the debating and stuff like that helped in that. But I would think the news is king. So that's what has to take center stage, really. My whole thing is that nothing I say or do or how I look shouldn't really be a distraction. I want you to tune in and I want to say, oh God, she looks well tonight. Not to be saying, look at the state of her, but but then forget about it so that we concentrate on the news. So again, I would say that too in my presentation and in my questioning. It shouldn't be a distraction. It's not about me. It's about me trying to elicit information, or it's about me trying to deliver the news with as much clarity and authority as I can. You should also never know how I feel about a story. If it's a political story, that's, I'm just there to tell you, you make up your own mind. But at the same time, then if it's a tragic story, you want to feel empathetic, or, you don't want to come across as totally stone cold either, so it's kind of a balance.
I can only imagine in kind of lead ups to elections and kind of different political circumstances you found yourself in, there may have been the odd kind of biting the inside of your cheek kind of moments.
When you do all of your reaction outside, either before or after, but you kind of, just go on a little bit of automatic pilot when you're actually in the studio,
Okay. And you mentioned there about having, about it not being about not putting your kind of personal feelings kind of into the conversation, into the dialogue. And, when I think about what your work must entail, there must be moments where it's actually very difficult to compartmentalize your own personal emotions and responses to a story that you're reporting on, and in putting the narrative forward in the way that's in the audience's best interest. Like, it's, I saw an example that you gave once about when you were a young mother yourself, and kind of some of the stories you were reporting on, or one particular story.
Dunblane, the massacre in Dunblane in Scotland happened just when my son was about 6 months old. It was in early 1996. And it just affected me in a way that a story like that, like I've lived through Ethiopia 1984, all that kind of thing, that the famine and gruesome and all as it was, but it just didn't affect me in that way. But this one did, because now I was a mother myself, and this was a gunman going into a classroom in the primary school in Dunblane and shooting up the kids. And actually, what a lot of people don't know is that the tennis player Andy Murray was in that classroom that day. He was only 7. He hid under a desk. And I just remember going home that night and feeling just a bit shook about the whole thing, and coming back in the next day, and I was doing the 6-1 at the time with Eamon Lawler, and Eamon saying to me, I'm not sure if I can face all this again. And then it suddenly struck me, well, it's not just me, you know, it's one thing to be here and to be performing, but when you step back, obviously you have to be impacted in the way that you would be. And people often say, excuse me, when you're co-presenting like that, what are you talking about? Well, we're having the same conversation as you and I would be having if we were sitting at home on our couch watching a big story like that developing. You know, you are reacting in the same way.
And does that kind of knowing that it's a shared experience make a difference?
I suppose it does, yeah. I don't know that I ever thought about that, but yeah, I suppose it does. Yeah, I mean, I obviously have to watch it, you know, and then when you move away, but you're surrounded by colleagues in the newsroom, so you see a big story, watch a big story break in the newsroom and watch the reactions of everybody. I remember the day Alan Shatter resigned, for example. It absolutely came out of the blue. Nobody was expecting it, and you suddenly hear people start, oh my God, oh look at this, look at what's happened up and down the newsroom, you know. So everybody reacts spontaneously, but then obviously when you go into studio, you have to
put the game face on.
Yeah.
It's it's an interesting one, because it's funny, because it's a conversation that we, in a totally different environment, but we would have with the tour guides in the museum quite regularly. This idea that, you know, what I had for lunch or what's going on with my life has nothing to do with the experience that the guest wants to have, and they're, you know, that those two elements of you need to exist in parallel and isolation at the same time.
And it's the same. I did a bit of teaching in my youth, and it's just the same thing. You know, you can get up in the morning and be in foul humor, but you still have to go in and face a class of kids, you know. So an awful lot of us have to do that in our day-to-day jobs. It wouldn't be anything special.
And so you've told me a little bit about your dad and the kind of the assistance, shall we say, that he gave you in kind of submitting the job application and kind of getting your foot in the door. But a number of people that I've met in the kind of media world over the years have I always get the impression that there's this, I don't know, strong community of mentorship that exists within media as an industry. And I was wondering, you know, can you think of the couple of key people who've been really instrumental in supporting your own kind of career and progression?
I can. So Daddy obviously would be the first one, and he was very meticulous and very organized, and I would tend to be a bit the same. And and then the first producer I had was when we were radio announcers. We used to do programs like Lebanon requests and hospitals requests, and there was an Irish language program in the afternoon and the odd documentary, things like that. So we had a playback on a Saturday, comes out of the presentation department, or is used to. And the producer was Brennan O'Keevan, and he was like a second father to me, I have to say. And he was the same, and he would be of the Roy Keane school, you know, fail to prepare and prepare to fail, always be over prepared. And I would have got that from my father as well. So that's one thing that has always stuck with me. I suppose Luke Smith was a person who was kind of always, I felt, had my back when I went over to the newsroom first. He was the one there. They would be the principal ones, I think. Lorna Madigan was my boss in the radio centre. She obviously brought me in. So she encouraged me. And she also then got me in because she was also a French speaker. And she used to work on, if the Eurovision Song Contest came to Dublin, or if the European Broadcasting Union, we used to host meetings. The directors general from all over Europe came one year in Killarney, and she would haul me in to work on those things with her as well. And I had some great times and great experiences on all those kind of things, which are kind of a bit of left field, but I loved it all the same.
I was thinking about the Eurovision. I think it's just an absolute treat and a delight of a kind of an initiative. And I think kind of not having it there last year, you definitely kind of you see its absence. But like when you think about the role that you played in the Eurovision and kind of getting involved, like what are the memories that stick out for you?
The memories are the year I went to get the presenter's job and I didn't get it. That's my biggest memory. But no, the ones that I worked on, particularly in 87, when Celine Dion won it. I was in the RDS that night. So that was a great night. And then I get confused then. No, yeah, was that maybe that was 1981. Anyway, that was the first one I worked on, I think. But anyway, then in 87, there was a guy, an English guy, Scott Fitzgerald, and he came second. Yeah, behind Celine Dion. Sorry, it was in 87. And they were all staying around the Berkeley Court. And I was working in that hotel, and we had the English delegation and the Israeli delegation because they had to have extra security. So we were kind of minding them, and the Swedes. But Kitty O'Shea's was there at the time. And the English delegation used to repair quite regularly to Kitty O'Shea's. So on the night, we came back up, and one of the backing singers for Scott Fitzgerald was Bruce Forsyth's daughter.
Okay.
So he landed in with his wife on the day to attend the Eurovision song. So we had all these people, and we came back to the Berkeley Court and we had a little party, and then it was all wrapping up. And one of the Kitty O'Shea's people came to me, Brian, and said, "We'll open up if you want to come down." So I got the bus driver who had driven us back from the RDS, and I said, "Any chance you'd take us down?" So he did, and sure, we were there till the wee small hours. And I can tell that now because Kitty O'Shea's doesn't exist anymore, so I won't be getting anyone into trouble.
That's the safeness of time.
Absolutely, yeah. I know it was great fun. And then, as I say, we had that run in the 1990s. Now, by that stage, I was the Here Are the Votes of the Irish Jury voice. So I loved that too. That was more a great experience. But we had Eurovision in Dublin, and the big one, of course, was in Mill Street in 1993. So, I just remember saying, "Good evening, Mill Street, Dublin calling," and that was a bit special.
Yeah, that sounds like one of those really special, memorable moments. It really, really does. It's it's beautiful. And I guess kind of, let me see. Like one of the things that, when you're talking about kind of going for different roles and different opportunities, I remember one thing you mentioned to me when we caught up earlier this week. We were talking about the Women on Air initiative, and you were kind of mentioning that you never felt throughout your own career that you were personally, that a man was chosen ahead of you for another opportunity. But I guess we are still talking about the role of women in certain positions, and that's going to be kind of a conversation that we continue until it's taken for granted. But I wonder, my question is kind of, how do you feel about the responsibility or kind of the impact that your own successes may be having on opening doors for other women?
Yeah, I think it's important, obviously. And as I said to you, I've never felt it held me back in any way, but I can't speak for all of my colleagues now. So, but I think when you look at it, there are quite a number of women now in presenting roles and in correspondence. In fact, the guys now are beginning to say, you have to be a woman or you won't get anywhere in the newsroom. But I think where we're lacking is in panelists and experts on air. And that's what I was saying talking to you about the Women on Air initiative, which is to get women, who are in these companies, who are in these roles, who have the expertise. And I think we can even see it as the pandemic evolves. In the beginning, it was all men too who were being sent out. Now we're having more and more women coming out to do the briefings, women who are in senior positions, who are on NEFIT, or who, like Karina Butler and women like that, are now coming more and more to the fore. And I think that's all good. And look at what just happened today. Ella McEntee giving birth this morning, the first serving minister. I mean, it's incredible to think about that. Morgan Quinn, it happened years and years ago, but she was a junior minister. She wasn't actually a cabinet minister. So, I mean, it's great that it has happened, but it's pity it has taken so long.
But it's the precedent is now set, and that in itself kind of leads an opportunity for, I guess, women who come after her, which is wonderful. But she took her leave amazingly well timed as well. It's
just a couple of days ago. Yeah,
hardly got a break, but
yeah. Now, I was also president of the Association of European Journalists between 2010 and 2014. And in the 50 years history of that association, I was the first woman president. There's another woman president now, a Greek lady, Saya Sausidou. She has just been elected this year. But I mean, I would kind of, in a way, I had been vice president for a number of years, and then I became president, and there were a couple around. But the excitement among like the Greeks and the Turkish women and even the Italians, and to have a woman president for the first time was palpable, so I got fantastic support from them all, I have to say.
Oh, what what a wonderful thing to be able to, celebrate. And as that phrase is, what's it? You can't be what you can't see.
Yeah.
Representation is important. And actually, when you mention the international, being the international president of the Association of European Journalists, I kind of, that got me wondering how, from your experience dealing with that organization, how does the experience of being a journalist in Ireland differ to other countries throughout the course of the EU?
Well, I remember being at a conference, because the conference moves around Europe every year. We've hosted it here a couple of times as well, very successfully, I might add, once in Dublin and once in Kilkenny on my watch anyway. But I was in Romania, and I was president at the time, and a camera crew came to me and they were just doing an interview with me at the end of the day. And, are you allowed to criticize your government? And I said, yeah. And would you not be afraid of ramifications if you did? I mean, not me personally, but the broadcaster in general. And I said, no, but the implication obviously was that they would be afraid. And I'm seeing it at the moment. Actually, there's a lot of stuff going on in places like Poland and Hungary. I just had a communication from a friend in Poland today, where it's not, we're coming up to World Press Freedom Day, which is on the 3rd of May. So there's a lot of stuff going on. But really, and the pandemic has allowed for even more of it, for media to be suppressed and constricted and all that kind of thing. So there's a lot of stuff happening that's not great at the moment. We don't, for all the giving out we do, I think we don't realize just how lucky we are sometimes.
Okay, and actually I see Bridget has just written in just to ask, and it's a question I'm curious to know the answer. Bridget's wondering, do you think that social media is something that might actually discourage women from wanting to be involved in politics or indeed any public facing organizations and capacities?
Yeah, I do. I do and I don't. I mean, what I would say about that is people think it's just begun to happen over the last few years with Twitter and, but I mean, people like me and Anne Doyle and colleagues have been getting letters written on bits of jotter, not signed, for years. I had security around me at one stage. There was a guy who was writing persistently and the guards became involved and all that kind of thing. So it's been going on. It's always been there. It's just that it's more visible now. And it's just, I get letters like that and I just go rip and into the bin, And so I stay off Twitter. I don't go near it. I don't want to know. If I've done something wrong, there are enough people around me that I trust and respect that will tell me what I've done wrong. I don't need to be reading about it on Twitter. So I follow people on Twitter, to keep up with breaking news and stuff like that, but I don't get involved myself. And I'm not on Facebook at all. I don't need it. Why would I be?
No, that's fair enough. Except to be on Facebook Live as you are this evening.
Yeah, well, you're in control of that, not me.
That's apologies. I just had to laugh.
Yeah.
But, and I guess when you mentioned colleagues of yours there, because you're dealing with live situations, I can only imagine that the kind of quality of your relationships and kind of the trust that you have with your producers and with your co-hosts really must be quite vital.
It is. Well, myself and Anne Doyle used to always say when we would embark on one conversation or another, there are very few of us in this world that can have this conversation because, in the newsroom at the moment, there are about 6 newscasters, so there are very few of us. So yeah, you do. And of course, and it's all about, it's a team, and if anybody breaks rank or if anybody creates trouble or gives out or whatever, it affects the team. And we're all there with the same purpose, is to get out on air the best bulletin that we can. So yeah, and especially if things start going wrong, particularly, if things break down and all, you're at the mercy. So you're really dependent and you need to trust the people who are on the other side of the glass, as we say.
And would you have kind of a favorite, it's kind of would you have a favorite on-air moment when you think about that which you can't control and that which happens when the light goes on? Like, would you have a moment that you just laugh when you think of, or you smile when you think of, as kind of a favorite highlight moment?
This whole studio broke down one night. And it just crashed. Everything crashed. That's the other problem with digital. You see, everything is interconnected. So you know, when one thing goes, the whole lot goes. So it was kind of, we were sitting there and the decision had to be made. Do we come on? Well, we were off the air. Are we going back on? Are we going to try and reboot here? But there's a headline studio around the corner. So the decision was taken to go around there. And actually, it's not me, because people said, you know, blah, blah, blah. But I'm used to reading without autocue or whatever, because I'm there long enough. I started off, I never had an autocue. And it was fine. But the person I was most pleased for that night was the editor, who was able to think on her feet. And that's the most crucial thing for me. I don't want to see anyone else panicking, because I need someone to call it, and I need someone to make the decisions, to tell me what to do, and I'll do it. And I was really pleased for this editor that night, because she wasn't that long in the job and she absolutely played blinder. So that's kind of the one that stands out in the last few years.
And I guess it really kind of probably put her on the map in terms of how she was perceived within the room. But and I guess, you know, I guess more funny than anything, but do you have kind of a blooper moment in your own head when you think of kind of the time you walked off, or, you know, the you come to the end of the hour, it's no longer live and broadcasting, that you kind of go, I cannot believe I said that, or I cannot believe that happened?
I know sometimes the words, I had one last week, I was just very tired for some reason, and the words wouldn't come out right. You just end up falling over words for no good reason. And you kind of think people will be saying, what in the name of God is wrong with her, you know? Sometimes it just goes better than others. And then sometimes you'll come out and you think, yeah, it was okay there. And other times you feel, yeah. Or there's always, my fear and dread is budget night. I hate budget night, because, as I say, the 9 in general, it's a kind of a summary of the day's news, but particularly on budget night, the 6 o'clock, it's kind of breaking, and there are lots of interviews in it and stuff like that. But 9 o'clock, it's the whole summary, and then you get to interview the Taoiseach. And I'm always afraid I'll have missed something, or I'll ask a stupid question, you know, because I just haven't seen something. And so I always kind of breathe a sigh of relief and if I can come out and somebody says to me, we've got a line, that's grand. Not that I would go searching for a line, but that's what, you know, other people might want. So yeah, I'm always relieved when that interview is over.
Okay, that's fair. I'd imagine the amount of new information being thrown at you and the kind of the minutes leading up to that must be quite an intense experience. And I wonder, can you think of a couple of your proudest moments, or the interviews that have meant the most to you that you've done so far?
Actually, the interview, apart from the Gay Byrne one, which I was so scared, I was over in Windsor. I was in England for President Higgins' state visit. And I think the 9 o'clock we did the last night, which was kind of the rap day of the rap week. And I think it was at 9 o'clock, I had Noel Dore, the former ambassador, and we got a good long chunk for a change. And a lot of people said, oh, that was just a great summary. And it was the first time I might have been parachuted in maybe to do 1 or 2 bulletins and something like that, but it was the first time I'd been there for the whole week. Brian Dobson was there doing the 6-1, but I was there doing the 1 and the 9. So I really got caught up in the whole story. And that was a good week's work, actually. I was very proud of that. But the actual interview wasn't on news at all. It was on the Godslot, which is a program that I used to do, which gives you a chance to get more involved in the interview and the interviewee, and maybe it's about a book, or maybe. And I interviewed Tommy Reichenthal, and it was one of his first ever. He's the Bergen-Belsen survivor who wrote I Was a Boy in Bergen-Belsen. And he hadn't spoken about any of this for years, and now has. And he's done a children's version of the book, which every child should be made read. But he was just fascinating. We did it in a small studio for radio. So it was just the 2 of us, really. And the producer there kind of on the other side of the desk. But I just was fascinated by him. There is not 1 ounce of bitterness in that man's body for everything that he's been through. And I've met him a few times since, but that's the one that stands out in my mind.
And what's the one message from him that you remember?
That he wasn't bitter.
Yeah.
And I don't know how he did it. I really don't. And then he got upset. He almost broke down then at one stage. Because there was something in the book I quoted to him. There were no birds. And that's what made him really sad, was the silence, that there was no greenery and there were no birds. And that brought him right back. and he just started to get upset there. But he got emotional, but he never got bitter.
That's so admirable. Just sounds like an incredible person. It's and so through the Godslot, you were exploring different religions and looking at kind of, as you said, kind of longer form interviews, and like that's a kind of, I can imagine it was a very different experience. And I see Helen, one of our guests here, has written in to ask, and I guess maybe this could apply to either forum. Helen's asking, do you ever actually watch back and kind of critique or review your own kind of performance, for lack of a better word?
Now and again, but I can't watch myself on television. I hate doing it. I absolutely hate doing it. It's easier on radio. Yeah, but I do every now and again, just to check, just to say, okay, I could do that better, or shouldn't stand like that, or I should, whatever. You have to do it every now and again. But I really don't like it. It's not a pleasant experience.
I think that's a very human response to that question. And then I guess kind of just stepping back to the stories a little bit. I kind of, obviously we're the Museum of Dublin, and that's primarily our subject matter. In terms of the stories that you've covered over the course of your career, like when you look at the key moments that have shaped our city, what are the kind of one or two moments or stories that stand out to you throughout the course of our lifetimes?
No, Fia, I didn't think about that really.
Sorry.
Well, yeah. I suppose Dublin football would have to feature in there.
Yeah.
2011, particularly when they came back. I mean, I was a teenager in the 70s, so I wouldn't have been doing it from a work point of view. And the whole, I remember President Clinton coming to Dublin, and then the Queen, the state visit, obviously, and Obama within days of that. I mean, that was just a crazy couple of weeks as well. And then I think, if memory serves me correctly, Gareth Fitzgerald died not too far of either side of those things too, and there was a state funeral. So that was all very busy. I think the state visit, I think Queen Elizabeth's state visit to Dublin was just so historic. I mean, that's easy to say, of course it was, but it was so emotional and everything. I remember when the day she was in Croke Park, I was actually the standby presenter in studio. I think Brian Dobson was at Croke Park and at the Garden of Remembrance, and I was the standby, and I kind of felt, I was emotional myself just watching it. I was kind of thinking, I'm glad I didn't have to speak. I think that was just, yeah, that was, I mean, did any of us ever think we'd see the day when Queen Elizabeth would be standing in Croke Park or in the Garden of Remembrance? I'm not sure we did.
That's probably one of those moments you were happy that it wasn't a split screen with yourself in view.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And actually, you mentioned the GAA there, and it's kind of when the GAA was never a huge part of my life growing up. But as I've got older, and kind of with the work that we're doing in the museum, like a lot of our conversations orientate around this idea of how do we grow civic pride? How do we make people take a sense of ownership and kind of feel proud or kind of aware of their presence in Dublin and what that means to them? And I've never felt prouder to be a Dub than sitting in the stands looking around going, this is us, I'm part of something bigger. I guess I'd love to just tell me a little bit more about your own kind of family's relationship.
Well, I suppose growing up, we would go, I could be at the Munster final one Sunday and I could be at the Ulster final the next. We would go on the road with Daddy, from time to time. I think it's actually through my own son, because in 2011, when the Dubs won the All-Ireland, not having won it for a number of years, since 1995, which is the year he was born, so he hadn't seen it until 2011. And he burst into tears that day. And I think that was more emotional for me than anything else. So, and the run now has just been fantastic for the last number of years. And the kids everywhere, and they're all going around with their Dublin jerseys and everything. And then even our local club now, I would be involved through Cormac with Scully Cunnell in Clontarf. And it's just great to see the buzz and the excitement and all of that. So yeah, but I mean, that exists all over the country. And it's just that it wasn't harnessed in Dublin for a long time. and other sports. Obviously, I think the GA is probably the dominant one now, but like there was a time there in the 90s, the 80s and 90s when, you know, they were afraid of soccer or rugby, not taking over because there's no, you know, they can all live side by side, but the GA would have been in decline in Dublin for a long time, and they did put heads together and invest a lot in it, and we're looking at the results now.
Yeah, that was a sound decision, it seems. And
but
then
you mean if you go down to Kerry, you know, I mean it's the lifeblood down there too. More so, everybody there talks football, you know.
Yeah, it's I'm a proud Dub, but there is a chunk of my heart that Kerry has, and the day I'm allowed to step foot on a Valentia Island, I will be there in a heartbeat. But I guess kind of then taking a step aside, you know, you're involved with the Kennedy Summer School over in New Ross. And I guess I'm kind of just curious, how does planning for a festival like that in times of pandemic, how's it looking for this year?
Yeah, well, it's looking good, actually. We just had a meeting today, so we're just trying to finalize our program now. So we're not sure what we'll be able to do in terms of whether there'll be live events or whether they'll be virtual or whether there'll be a hybrid. So we're going to plan for both. And, you know, hopefully, you know, because the big thing is we usually have guests over from the States, and we're not sure who will be able to travel. But I think if we can have a certain number of people in the theatre in New Ross and have a certain number of people on the stage, and the promise of maybe people coming, and if they have to cry off, put them up on a wall, and, you know, that we'll be able to do something. Last year we didn't go ahead, we bowed out, but we're determined to do something this year. So there will be a Kennedy Summer School on the first weekend of September, come hell or high water.
Amazing. And I think we've all become that bit more, I guess, resourceful and resilient, and kind of going, okay, you know, things may not be capable of happening exactly how we want them to, but the hybrid model, you know, it means that we can be connecting with people from continents across the world at any one time. It's quite special in its own way.
Well, there was just one of the guys launched a book, Brian Murphy, and with Donica, a colleague of his, did a book of some of the essays and some of the talks that have featured at the summer school, and we were to have a launch. It was to be done last year, and it would have happened at the Kennedy Summer School and all that. So then they pushed it back. So it was being launched by the Edward M. Kennedy Institute in Boston. So there were 984 people at the virtual launch. Yeah. It was done around Patrick's Day, and the Taoiseach came on and launched it from Dublin. And there were, Samantha Power was there and a couple of speakers like that. But I mean, you'd never get that kind of, you know, reaction or a number of people into a room physically. So the reach is fantastic. You know, that's what this allows you to do, is to have a much bigger reach.
No, absolutely. And that sounds like it was an incredible success. It really, really does. And then I guess kind of one of the kind of concluding things, we're coming up to that point in the evening, but one of the concluding things I wanted to ask you about, one of the things that's been a very large part of my life in the past year has been music. And I know that you presented your own classic melodies on Lyric for a good number of years. And so it just got me thinking and curious, you know, when you're out for a walk, what are you listening to? I
am listening to a Bill Withers compendium. Okay. Bill Withers died in March of last year, just after the pandemic started, and President Obama tweeted a Spotify playlist, and I picked up on it, and that because I would know a lot of those songs from the 1970s, and it's just real happy boppy sunshiny music. So that's what I've been listening to a lot. I've loved you and the National Symphony Orchestra were the leaders in all of this. The Symphony Orchestra too started doing concerts quite early on, virtually from the concert hall on a Friday evening at 7. So like with you, I'm off every second Thursday or Friday, so I can tune in one week but not the next. So I've been listening to them. And then again, the Metropolitan Opera, they did, remember Lady Gaga's big concert? The Metropolitan Opera in New York did something similar a few weeks later with all the top artists from around the world. Went on, it started at 6 o'clock on a Saturday evening and it went on till about 10:30 at night. But since then, they've had paying ones that you can, Jonas Kaufmann came from a castle somewhere in Germany, and Renee Fleming was in a cathedral in Washington, and, you know, they have them in various locations. for $15 or something like that, you know, so you'd be paying 10 times that to go and see them. Now, it's not the same. It's never going to be the same. But what I do now is I plug in the headphones onto the computer and you kind of get a better sense of the sound and the atmospherics and stuff like that. So that's what I've been listening to. But Bill Withers for my walks, or the Hector and Tommy Tiernan podcast is my latest if I want a good laugh.
Which I think is also important. Well, I'll put the Bill Withers Spotify on for my next walk. So thank you for that. And I guess kind of as we, you know, hopefully make kind of more good progress in the coming, I guess, months and years to kind of get through and hopefully past this kind of pandemic chapter in our lives, I kind of wonder, you know, what are the types of stories that either you're looking forward to telling again that you haven't been given the chance because of the way the last kind of 14 months have gone, or what are the stories that in the back of your mind when you start telling them, it means we're getting past this?
The only thing about it is every time we think this is calming down, there's a new twist and turn, and you know, so God knows where it's going to go in the next few months is all I can say. But I think the things will resurface, things like homelessness, things like ordinary other health problems, and then the tsunami of problems that are going to come afterwards. I think there are so many untold stories. Whether it's psychiatric problems, whether it's other types of health problems, whether financial people are going to be in awful financial straits, how many businesses are going to survive, and how people cope with all of that. I mean, none of that is being touched at the moment because the actual pandemic is dominating everything, but all those stories have yet to be told.
So you have a busy couple of years ahead.
Busy, yeah.
That's this has been absolutely such a treat of a way to spend an hour, and I've really so sincerely enjoyed this conversation. I really have appreciated you taking the time. So I know you've given up one of your available Thursday evenings, so for that I'm incredibly grateful and thankful, and to you for being here this evening. Really sincerely thank you.
No problem. Onwards and upwards. And I look forward to when you do reopen. I did manage to sneak in at Christmas one day and see the Italia 90 exhibition. So as soon as you're back, I'll be back.
Thank you so much. I cannot wait till the day. And I would dare say at this point, when I go back to watch the news on replay, we have a date.
Okay.
We'll send a note to everyone very shortly with that in mind to give you a bit of details around the museum's planned reopening. But otherwise, I will see you all back next week for another 120 Dublin Stories. But for now, thank you so much to everyone who's been here with us, and to Eileen Dunne. Sincerely, thank you so much for taking the time. And that's it for this evening. Good night.
Okay, good night, everybody. Thank you.